Chapter 15, The Robot Army. The wall surrounded the first city like an impenetrable barrier, black and opaque, that seemed to continue infinitely towards the sky until it was lost from sight. Countless rows of bricks were perfectly arranged, presenting neither an opening nor the slightest crack. Ulrich and XANA had walked from one side to the other twice, following the city perimeter. It was no use, the wall had one sole gate and its enormous doors were tightly sealed. Even XANA's touch had no effect on them. "Seems like there's no physical way to get past this wall," Ulrich declared triumphantly, when they found themselves by the enormous, impenetrable door for the second time. They then sat on the footpath, in front of an empty shop. Many hours had passed since he'd been virtualised into the first city, and he was now hungry and tired. XANA slammed the wall with all his might. When he touched the black bricks, his fists became engulfed in blue electricity, like small artificial fires. "It's impossible," the artificial intelligence shouted. "We could get through here. Just here. This door opened on my command." Ulrich couldn't help but give a weak smile. "Did you forget? We're in a closed environment. Lyoko is on the other side, and you can't reach it." XANA turned towards him. He reached his hands out as if he were grabbing air, and an enormous curved scimitar with a blade as red as blood appeared out of nowhere. Ulrich jumped and leapt up, taking on a defensive pose. "Don't mock me, human. I may not have gotten all my strength back, but I'm still the guardian of the first city." Ulrich softly nodded, and XANA's scimitar disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, transforming into a cloud of black smoke that dissipated as it rose into the air. "So what do we do now?" Ulrich asked him, not taking his eyes off his enemy. XANA gave him a mocking pout. "You're forgetting that right now, a part of me is in the mirror with Elida. Hopper's journal is a perfect reproduction of certain days in June 1994. So perfect that it even includes the factory and the river. And the scanners. And the supercomputer. So you're saying that there's a copy of Lyoko in the mirror?" Ulrich exclaimed, eyes wide. "Evidently, the Lyoko from 1994 and the authentic one, the one in present day, aren't linked. But that doesn't mean that I won't be able to open a passage." XANA shrugged, impatient, and then placed a finger on his lips to tell Ulrich to keep quiet. "Do you hear that?" The boy approached the gigantic gate once again. The flight along the edge of the well was rather quick, so much so that the walls seemed to darken, fusing into a single blurred, dizzying object. Jeremy gritted his teeth as the mysterious force of the codelyoko carried him up high at an insane speed. And then, without warning, the annoying blurred object disappeared. The boy shot out of the mouth of the well, directly towards the colorless sky like the cork from a bottle of champagne, and the air once again became calm and immobile. Jeremy felt himself fall down again. He tried to regain his balance but couldn't manage, and fell flat on his face. He got back up on his feet, rubbing his nose. A very long, silver bridge stretched out in front of him, floating above the void. Behind Jeremy was the well he had just exited, a dark blue cylinder whose end was out of eyesight, descending towards the nothingness and supporting one of the bridge arches. The other arch ended further on the horizon, where one could vaguely see the toweringly high black wall of the first city. The bridge was flat with very low railings on each side. Jeremy leaned on the one closer to him and breathed deeply. His gaze meandered to the abyss below him and his whole body began to shake. This place defied all the laws of physics. It could only exist in a virtual world such as Lyoko. "Don't pay attention to what your eyes are telling you," the boy said to himself. "What you see is only a computer program. The endless void beneath your feet isn't real, and the sky can't be like that." He forced himself to take a step and almost tripped over on the twisted ends of his horrible elf slippers. He took a breath and looked around him. He took another step. That worked. Jeremy began to run along the bridge. He stopped when he'd ran more or less 3/4 of the way. The endless voids that ran around Lyoko were already far away, and in front of him something had grown even bigger, submerging him in its gigantic mass as he approached the wall of the first city, so black that it absorbed all light and so tall that its top could not be seen. What happened? Memory's voice came to him, transmitted right into his own ear. "Look," he said, centering his gaze on a strange object attached to the railing. It was a small, transparent crystal cage, one side of which lay over the edge of the bridge, above the abyss. It was attached to the railing with a bolt, Also acting as an axis, it could turn on, and contain 3 antique-looking keys. Jeremy carefully observed them. The first was dark and ended in teeth that made up the shape of a gun. The second was purple and its head formed the shape of a musical note. The third was a massive golden key, encrusted with precious stones. 3 keys, Memory commented. A riddle, Jeremy confirmed. The boy remarked that the floor of the crystal cage could be slid to the side, freeing the keys. Due to the way it rotates, only one of the keys would fall onto the bridge, while the others would slide out the other side, being lost forever. It's a test, he affirmed. I need to choose the right key, or we won't be able to open the door to the first city. He wondered for a moment if he could choose the incorrect one on purpose. Doing so would mean the Green Phoenix couldn't get into the first city, and XANA couldn't return to Lyoko. But if he failed, Hannibal Mago could send someone else into the virtual world to take his place. Maybe one of his friends. Jeremy was convinced that if another person were to come here, the keys would reset to the way they were before, like when you start a video game from the beginning. And so, he had to win this game. No matter what. Hurry up. Mago's voice suddenly demanded, hurting his eardrum. Take the key. Yes, but, which one? He asked, indecisive. Well, the gun-shaped one, obviously. The first city is a weapon, that key must be the right one. And why not the golden one? Jeremy argued. The city could bring you great wealth, couldn't it? The boy moved swiftly. He turned the crystal cage until he found what seemed to him to be the right key and opened the door, letting it slide towards him. The object he had chosen fell to his feet, while the 2 others slipped into the void and seemed to disappear in the darkness. What did you do, stupid boy? It was Mago again, yelling like a madman. You're going to pay for that. Jeremy leaned down to pick up the remaining key, the purple one whose head was shaped like a musical note. Don't worry. This one will open the door. It seemed obvious. It was another one of Hopper's ways of ensuring that only Elida could resolve this riddle. The girl had always loved music. In the video the professor had left at the Hermitage, Jeremy saw her seated at the piano, still as a young child, playing on the white and black keys. And what's more, once at Kadic, she had proven herself to be an excellent DJ. Musical notes, a good, clean invention to neutralize the first city. Jeremy attached the key to his belt and began to run towards the wall. The time to end this had come. Ulrich pressed his ear to the wall, ignoring the static electricity that enveloped his head. They were a little scary, but not harmful. They didn't even tickle. You're right, he then admitted, I can hear noises. Sort of like footsteps from someone arriving on the other side. XANA finished for him, placing his hands on the immense door and pushing as hard as he could. But the door didn't budge even a millimeter. Nothing. I can't open it and I can't even tell who could be on the other side. Ulrich thought that it was a really great question. Who could it be? Maybe Elida, having found a passage from the mirror. Or worse, it could be someone from the Green Phoenix, a terrorist. Or maybe it was Hannibal Mago in person. XANA, he said, has it occurred to you that whoever is on the other side could be an enemy? And that we're unarmed? The young man glanced at him briefly, and burst out in loud laughter. What are you talking about? Once this door opens, I can return to Lyoko and defragment my strength. I'll reunite with the part of me that's still locked in the mirror, and after that, I'll have no enemies. Only my slaves. Ulrich couldn't manage a reply. XANA looked him, his expression a mixture of indifference and compassion. But, he murmured, if you feel safer that way. Suddenly, the weapon Ulrich always carried on Lyoko appeared in his hands, his Japanese sword, a katana. Wow, he exclaimed. Thank you. Well, you might need it. Look, the other responded, pointing to the door, where a luminous screen had appeared. On the screen, an A appeared. Then an E. And an L. Elida, Ulrich whispered. When his friend's name finished writing itself, a sound like fire crackling in a fireplace could be heard. The enormous black door dissolved, transforming into a snow of glowing cinders. On the other side of the door appeared a strange boy dressed like an elf. He had a truly ridiculous appearance, with his hairy ears and pointed cap with a feather sticking out of one side. When Ulrich recognized him, he leapt on the boy and hugged him. Jeremy. How are you? I'm good, thanks. And you? The two friends separated and exchanged a gushy handshake. Not too bad. Could be worse. I've got loads of things to tell you. And XANA, Ulrich suddenly turned away. He hadn't seen him go through the door, whether running, flying, transforming into smoke, or anything. But he had disappeared. XANA had escaped. The creature fluctuated in the air like a translucent cloud of smoke. And in a fraction of a second, he had traversed the bridge leading to Lyoko and entered the deep well that used to contain his operational core. The same one the children had destroyed. But he could now repair it. XANA spread his mental tentacles out into the 4 sectors of Lyoko, filling them with monsters and taking control of all the towers. All the parts of himself that had been dispersed onto computers all over the world as small fragmented backups returned home, and he began to recompose them like minuscule pieces of a gigantic jigsaw puzzle. Operational level, 80% XANA executed a scan of the network, testing the connections and the levels of security on the 2 sandboxes it contained, the mirror and the first city. The city was now open, the castle fully available to him. But operational level, 90%. The part of him that was in Hopper's journal with Elita was still trapped. He could now communicate with it, but they could not reunite. That is of little importance. It's nothing but a database, in the end. I don't need it to reach maximum power. XANA ignored the problem and decided to harvest the final fragments of himself, recomposing his memories and preparing himself. And finally, operational level, 99%. The process was halted, and XANA, although he had no voice at that moment, screamed. Why? Why couldn't he complete his reconstruction? He began working an auto-diagnostic program, analyzed the results and understood. Elita and XANA were seated in the Hermitage kitchen. Taking advantage of the infinite amount of food in the fridge, the young girl had prepared a nice meal. She had already gone through the whole mirror with XANA at least twice, listening again and again to the discussions her father had with Professor Hertz, and especially talking a lot to her strange new friend. She finally began to understand more about her past. Her father had escaped from Project Carthage, and, to try and neutralize it, had built the first city. For this, he had programmed Lyoko to act as a protective barrier, and had given the first city a guardian, XANA. This creature wasn't human, but her father had allowed it to spend lots of time with his daughter in order to teach it the difference between right and wrong. And, despite the fact that Elita remembered nothing from this time, she felt that it had somehow worked. Richard had revealed that when they went to school together, he was jealous of a mysterious friend that she had called Mr. XX as in XANA. But the girl still didn't understand what had happened after that. Did her father discover that something wasn't working? But why? Everything was so complicated. At that moment, Elita nibbled on some potatoes from a plate that was already becoming transparent. What are you thinking about? XANA cheerfully asked her. About, before, she responded. When we went to visit Kadic. I saw Richard when he was my age, and all my old classmates. I don't remember them, and that seemed weird, that's all. But it's funny too, the boy exclaimed. We're like ghosts, we can go where we want, and nobody can see us or tell us off. He stopped suddenly. His eyes remained glued to the ceiling, motionless, completely dark. Hey. Is everything okay? Elita asked, distracted, brushing his fingers. Yes, XANA responded, smiling. I've just completed a data transfer. Your friend Jeremy opened the door in the wall of the first city, and so I mean, the other part of me, was able to return to Lyoko. He's busy reconstructing his operational core. Oh, said Elita. Does that mean something will change for us? Maybe so, XANA whispered, gently grabbing her arms. If you want to help me. What do you mean? Elita and the boy's eyes met. XANA's eyes were shining brightly. I realized that something wasn't working, he said. It's hard to explain. I haven't yet finished all the subroutines in my programs, and, as a result, well, to put it briefly, it's complicated. But it seems that I've finally understood what I want more than anything else. Which is stopping me from reaching 100% of my capacity. What is it? I want to become human. XANA grinned and stood up on the chair, then the table, trampling on the remains of the food, which turned to smoke. Yes, human, he exclaimed. That's why I felt so unhappy and incomplete before. But by being with you, I've understand what I'm truly lacking. I need to turn myself into a true human being. Think about it, this way, I would be the guardian of Lyoko, just like your father wanted, and we could get rid of those green phoenix guys. Lyoko would become a world for just the two of us. You and me. And your friends too, if you want. We would be together. Ilita observed him, not knowing what to say, and felt an almost painful shiver rise from her wrists up into her arms and shoulders, finally reaching her throat. XANA couldn't become human. If there were a way to do it, her father would have known. But she remembered nothing and her father was dead. The boy realized that something was wrong. He sat down again and warmly took her hands with his own. Will you help me? Do you promise that you'll help me become human? Ilita had a moment of hesitation, and then slowly shook her head. I would love to, really I would, she murmured. But, I don't think it would be possible. Silence fell on the two children, filling the room like a waterfall of ice. XANA stood and walked around the room, stopping at the kitchen door. Where are you going? The young girl asked him, alarmed. I don't know, he responded quietly. If you don't want to help me, it doesn't matter. I'll find someone else to do it. The weapon of the first city is now in my hands, and I'm sure that the Green Phoenix will be more than happy to ally with me. That was all it took to make Ilita fall from her chair. She reached for the boy and tried to grab his arm. What are you talking about? Stop. Please. Let's talk about this. But all she grasped in her hands was a small plume of smoke. In the first underground level of the factory, Memory was seated at the control terminal. From the moment Jeremy opened the door linking Lyoko to the first city, the monitors in front of her had gone crazy. On the woman's left, the holographic projector showed the world of Lyoko like a mixture of various colors, green for the forest sector, yellow for the desert, white for the ice sector and dark brown for the mountains. The map was now populating itself, all over the place. Countless red markers had appeared, indicating towers, and other moving markers that flagged creatures. What was going on? Grigory Nictopoulos stood waiting behind Memory, occasionally stroking his dogs distractedly. What does all that mean? He asked at one point, pointing to the third screen on the terminal, which was full of various patterns and data. Impossible, Memory murmured after glancing at the screen. The woman began to hammer at the keyboard in an almost savage rage, skimming through pages all over the place. It's a report, she said finally. It shows the possible uses, both peaceful and militant, of the first city. Everything we can possibly do with the castle. Such as, well, the towers can be used to control any kind of electric or electronic device. Anywhere in the world. Memory turned to Grigory and saw a worrying expression had appeared on his face. And then there's transportation, the woman continued reluctantly. Say there's a scanner column in the United States. Someone could enter Lyoko from here, in France, and come out in the United States in a fraction of a second. Travel time and costs are practically reduced to zero. For a moment, the two were silent. Grigory considered that the value of this application was incalculable, moving troops from one side of the world to the other in the blink of an eye, commercial trafficking, industrial use, business. It was a veritable gold mine. It also talks about materializing virtual creatures, Memory added. In other words, that it's possible to create new beings in Lyoko, and then have them enter reality through the towers. What else does the report say? Grigory asked after audibly gulping. There's a letter for Hannibal Mago. I'll go tell him, said the man, straightening up and forcefully grabbing his dog's double leash. Hannibal Mago sat on the chair at Memory's control terminal and played with the rings that covered his fingers. You're sure this isn't a trick? We don't know who wrote the file in this letter, Memory responded, but it's clear that it wasn't one of the children. It came directly from inside Lyoko. And, apparently, whoever sent it can control the virtual world. Excellent. Hannibal Mago moved the brim of his hat away from his eyes and began to read. The letter was quite brief. Dear Mr. Mago, although you don't know me, I know everything about you. I know how much money and how much time you have invested in the Lyoko project, and I'm up to date on all the information collected by Grigory Nictopoulos. For example, I could easily tell you the true identity of the woman you have named Memory. As for myself, you can call me XANA or Guardian. So as not to bore you, I shall get straight to it. The file I have sent you shows what I know about Lyoko, the first city and the castle, and I know how to use them. If you wish, I would be honored to grant you access to them. As you may have guessed, I would like to request something in exchange for my help. I would like to have but one wish fulfilled, to leave this computer and become human. If you accept to help me, to secure our little agreement, I would be more than able to set the castle to work and materialize a small army of robot soldiers into reality, using the factory scanners. This army will obey your orders, and will be of great help to you. For example, you could attack Kadic Academy. Also, it could be that you didn't know. Mago calmly finished reading the letter, evaluating the information it contained and nodding to himself. Help this XANA become human? He hadn't the slightest idea what that meant, but ultimately, he didn't care. The important thing was the castle. The first city. And, seeing what the letter said, Kadic Academy as well. Mago reread the last line on the screen. If you choose to accept this agreement, go down to the second underground floor to welcome your new soldiers. Sincerely, XANA, the boss of the Green Phoenix, smiled. He rested his fingers on the keyboard and wrote, "Dear friend, materialize the soldiers directly into the Hermitage. The chalet is now under my control." He then took the computer mouse in his right hand. Click. Chapter 16, The Battle of Kadic. Jeremy carefully observed the solid, black hexagonal building. It's the virtual projection of an advanced computing core that directly relies on the multi-core processors of the supercomputer, he explained to Ulrich. Ha 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 ha. May I ask what's so funny? The boy snapped at his friend, embarrassed, while turning to face him. No, it's nothing, responded Ulrich, wiping the tears from his eyes. It's just that it's hilarious watching an elf talk like a mad computer scientist. Jeremy sighed in defeat. It wasn't his fault that he looked so ridiculous on Lyoko. The boy approached the castle and brushed its dark surface. He observed the sparks that enveloped his hands, tickling them slightly. A firewall, he noted. The city wall is the system's firewall, leading to the castle and completely surrounding it. And that means what? Asked Ulrich. Hopper tried to protect Lyoko from the first city. When the firewall is active, the computer core for the castle can't be used, Jeremy explained to him. But the wall is open now. Jeremy gave his friend a sad look. Yeah. And I don't know what will happen. A flash of light suddenly blinded their eyes. The castle wavered for a moment like the screen of a television set filled with static. What happened? Cried Ulrich. Oh, murmured Jeremy. He touched the wall again, and the black shell of the firewall again disappeared, though for a bit longer this time. Then, the castle walls seemed to vibrate with a dull hum. Do you hear that too? He asked Ulrich. Yeah, a sound like the machinery in a factory, the boy said while nodding his head. It's not machinery. The castle is a virtual structure, remember? No, the problem is the firewall. Someone is hacking it. Our dear friend XANA is currently destroying the protection that Hopper created, exclaimed Jeremy upon seeing Ulrich's confusion. He's about to use the castle. And we have no way of stopping him. The sky became dark and menacing. A blue bolt of lightning struck the castle at its highest tower, shaking it at its foundation, and a cascade of meandering sparks fell from the building to the ground of the first city, dispersing in all directions. The two boys were swept off their feet, but Ulrich managed to get to his knees and grab Jeremy by the arm. Come on, he cried out. We need to get out of here. Another lightning bolt struck the castle, but this time, the static effect lasted longer. The structure was covered in a shower of sparks, continuously changing colors from black to red to a bright white. Jeremy crawled back on all fours without losing sight of what was happening in front of them. Ulrich pointed a small wall out to him, and the two children dashed behind it. All around them, tiny sparks crackled like small snakes that weaved under their clothes, causing them unbearable stings. Jeremy raised his head above where they were hiding to glance around. The castle in front of them had changed. The black surface that had covered it was gone, and the castle was now of the same light blue as the rest of the structures in the city. The rows of black bricks had also disappeared. One last lightning bolt surged into the building, then the dense storm cloud dispersed as quickly and as unexpectedly as it had arrived, leaving the sky its usual indefinable color. Look at that! Ulrich exclaimed. Things seem a lot more calm now, don't they? Maybe in appearance, but the castle is now operational. Whatever will happen with it, we're about to find out. It only took 2 minutes for them to get their answer. A part of the wall that was just in front of them separated itself from the rest, inclining more and more to meet up with the road. It was anchored in place with large, dark chains and resembled the drawbridge of a real castle. The two boys started to hear a slow, rhythmic noise. It sounded like footsteps, said Ulrich. Soldiers marching, nodded Jeremy with a grave expression on his face. The robots stood more than 2 meters tall and were incredibly robust. They wore bronze armor similar to that of medieval knights, a complex design of shiny plates and joints, wearing dark iron masks on their heads with a row of small, yellow lights instead of eyes. From the top of their helmets spouted long cables that lead to electrical plugs, winding about in the air like tentacles. There's a lot of them. I count at least 40 or so, and more keep coming. The robots were marching with stiff legs, goose-stepping in a martial fashion. They exited the drawbridge in compact lines and strolled decisively down a street that wove between houses. Suddenly, Ulrich's face lit up. "Look," he exclaimed, excited. "They're going toward the wall, but they're taking the roads on the ground, not in the air. It's going to take them a long time. We can beat them and close the door before they get there." "But they'll see us," protested Jeremy. "They won't even notice us." "Can't you tell?" he said to his friend with a smirk on his face. "They look pretty stupid." The two boys left from behind the wall and ran towards the golden road that rose towards the sky, surrounding the castle. They quickly passed by Hopper, who was still immobile. The image of the professor was frozen in an amusing position with his index finger out, signaling something below him. He looked like a toy whose batteries ran out of juice. "Are you sure about this, Ulrich?" Jeremy questioned, worriedly. "We're going in the opposite direction. Watch this." Ulrich jumped unbelievably high and far. He landed gracefully on the second floating road, the one that was ruby red, and looked back down towards Jeremy. "Just do what I did," he called out to his friend. "But I'm not able to." "It's easy. It's like having rockets on the bottoms of your shoes. You just have to give it a try." Jeremy obeyed. He bent his knees as much as he could, then jumped up. He couldn't stop himself from crying out as his body projected itself towards the sky with such disproportionate force. He miscalculated his trajectory and passed over the red road where Ulrich was waiting for him. But his friend must have figured he'd do something of the sort, because he jumped as well and caught him with his hand mid-jump and pulled him down to a safe landing. Ulrich burst out laughing. "I told you it was easy, champion. You just have to practice a bit." They both began to run again on the translucent ribbon road that crossed the first city. Jeremy listened as the marching of the robots resonated between the buildings in an obsessive rhythm. The boy started to feel nauseous. He was the one who had opened up the passageway. If these monsters came to destroy the real world, it would be all his fault. "The bridge that heads to Lyoko is that way," Ulrich pointed out to him without slowing down. But suddenly, the two children froze in place. The wall that surrounded the first city had disappeared. It had disintegrated. They could see the suspended bridge, and further out, the cylinder that gave access to the core of Lyoko. Everything else appeared to be a digital void. The city was an island of homes, parks, and streetlights levitating in the air. "We've lost," said Jeremy, falling onto the road, completely disheartened. The army from the castle crossed the streets and avenues below towards the bridge, and the first robots began to cross it with great strides. "They're getting away," cried Ulrich, releasing a few aimless punches, furious. Jeremy gave him a scornful look. "And what good's that supposed to do? You want to take on an entire army by yourself? Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to stop them." Ulrich sat by his side. The two children stayed there contemplating what to do about the army that was parading through the first city, disappearing as they marched towards Lyoko. Odd Swatch emitted a beep, and the screen instantly lit up. 23:59 changed to midnight. A new day was beginning. But this Sunday was not like the rest. The boy readjusted the metal strainer on his head, took a small, slightly flattened piece of bread out of his pocket, removed it from its wrapping and began to munch on it. Eating woke him up some more. "Stop making noise, Odd," whispered Yumi. "First the watch, and now you're crunching away." "And put away that strainer," echoed Sissy Delmas, the principal's daughter. "You look ridiculous." Richard observed the young girl, a lot smaller than him, and quickly put away the pan he had been wearing on his head for a helmet. Odd laughed. The 4 kids were in the Kadic Park. They had been on watch for a long time now, keeping an eye on the silent trees and the muddy grass, but no one wanted to change shifts before 3 in the morning. That afternoon, after having spoken with Dido, who was still with the men in black across the ocean, Principal Delmas and Professor Hertz had declared war. Everyone at the school took shelter, and they had at least some form of defense. They had formed patrol groups, 1 adult for 3 kids, all ready to sound the alarm. Richard, who was 23 years old, even though he resembled a scared, little puppy, had been considered an adult. After having helped prepare their defenses, Odd had a headache and felt exhausted. Yumi was also exhausted. Sissy, the principal's daughter, was wearing a violet faux fur coat, which was already completely covered in mud. The young girl was unbearable and rather snobby, but she needed to grin and bear it. They were at war, and they needed to fight. In the case of an attack, do you think they'd come through here? Asked Richard, whispering. It's very probable, responded Yumi, pointing to the trees. The wall that surrounds the school is resistant, but the hermitage is at this end. And they are the ones who built the barrier separating it from the park. So, they could remove it whenever they want. Odd finished eating his small piece of bread and balled up the colorful wrapper, then putting it in his pocket. But we still have the trap, he murmured next, confidently. His hands still hurt from all the work it had taken for him to make it, and they had to cover the hole with branches so that it wouldn't be visible. Do you really think this hole can stop a bunch of heavily armed soldiers? Yumi reprimanded him. With a bit of luck, it could give us the necessary time to sound the alert, said Richard, helping him out. The silence returned, only interrupted by Sissy, who sniffled from time to time. It was freezing cold, and small clouds of their breath seemed to form whenever they opened their mouths. Furthermore, it was pitch black outside. No one could see anything. Odd checked his watch again. It was only 15 minutes past midnight. Only several minutes had passed. Then, boom. Yumi motioned for them to remain silent, approached Odd so that he could see her mouth, and spoke silently. It's not a noise. It's a vibration. Boom, boom, boom. Without saying a word, the boy lay down on the ground and pressed his ear against the wet grass. His friend was right. The earth was vibrating with rhythmic steps like those of an army. Odd jumped to his feet, sunk the strainer onto his head, and grabbed his weapon, a wooden broom handle. Richard, he exhaled. Take the phone and sound the alarm. Sissy leapt up. The alarm, the young girl cried with a screech. The alarm. Why? Shut it. Yumi ordered her, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her behind herself. They withdrew towards the reassuring silhouette of Kadic, while Richard pressed on the buttons of his phone to get in contact with Hertz. We don't have time, exclaimed Odd, tugging him by the coat. We need to get out of here. Why? Because it probably wouldn't be a good idea to stay and keep them company. The boy pointed towards the shrubbery in front of them, and Richard looked to see the robots. At that, they began to run with their hearts in their throats until they lost their breath. The first robots, of which there were about 20 or so, exited from between the bushes, marching in compact lines of 3. They don't seem to be armed, huffed Richard while running. Yeah, noted Odd. But they seem just as dangerous. The young boy left the others to run ahead while he slowed down to better observe the approaching monsters. They were coming from the woods in the park and marching towards the main pathway that headed towards the Kadic buildings. Let's see just how tough they are, thought Odd while extending his arm with the broomstick in hand. He gathered a bit of momentum, then threw his weapon with all his might as if it were a javelin. The broom handle flew through the darkness and landed with a thud against the metallic head of the first giant automaton. The creature didn't even seem hurt, nor did it slow down, but the small lights on its helmet went from yellow to red. Way to go, cried Yumi. Now you made it angry. It was just a test, Odd justified himself. The soles of his shoes smashed into the gravel of the pathway, and the boy hurried his pace, catching up to Yumi. We should split up, he suggested. You and Sissy should go to the dorms and raise the alarm. Richard and I will try to join up with our parents and the principal in the administration offices. Got it. Come on, Sissy, let's go. Yumi grabbed Sissy's fur coat by the sleeve and pulled her to the side, while the boys ran straight to the doors of the main Kadic building, where the lights were on. Odd heard the sound of the steps coming. from behind him changed their pace and, without slowing down, threw a glance over his shoulder. The lines of the soldiers divided in perfect order. The first line followed him and Richard, the second one advanced towards Yumi and Sissy, and the third was continued in their direction, the fourth turned to follow the girls, and so on. "Did you see that?" he gasped. "I'm starting to get a bad feeling about all this," nodded Richard with a frightened look on his face. Jim Morales was keeping watch in front of the dorms. The gym teacher was wearing a protective mask like those worn by baseball catchers and was holding a very modern, aluminium bow in his right hand with a series of pulleys on its ends. Disguised like this, he resembled an alien that had recently come out of a sports shop, and despite the current frenzy, Yumi couldn't help but give a little laugh. Sissy, provoked by fear, outran the young girl in a few strides. "Alert, alert. The monsters are coming," she started to cry as soon as she could see Jim under the glow of the school's fluorescent lights. Without a doubt disoriented by the fur coat covered in mud and the crazy expression on the young girl's face, overcome with emotion, he took Sissy for a wild bear. He seized the bow tightly, clipped the end of the arrow to the cord and pulled it back. Then, he aimed at the girl. Yumi threw herself to the ground like she had learned in judo class and took Sissy down with her. But she worried for nothing. The arrow snapped off the bow with a ping and, not a moment later, fell at the gym teacher's feet with a sad plop. Jim looked all around him, trying to understand what went wrong with his athletic demonstration. Yumi, in the meantime, stood and pushed Sissy with all her might towards the entrance of the dorms. "Quick, Jim, they're coming. We need to get back inside and shut ourselves in." The cables on the heads of the robots had already started to appear from within the trees, swaying like seaweed. Yumi saw her teacher's eyes open wide behind his baseball mask. She made it over to him with one last jump and pushed him inside, closing and locking the large door behind her. She looked all around her, spotting the fire alarm near the light switches and moving towards it. She broke the glass that was protecting the red button with her elbow and pressed it forcefully. The dorms were rattled by the rhythmic sounds of the alarm. "The other students," said Yumi taking Jim by the arm. "Are they all here?" "Yes, upstairs with Walter Stern and your parents." "Perfect. Let's prepare our line of defense." The main entrance at Kadic was being watched by Professor Hertz and Odd's father, whose lantern left dim circles of light in the darkness. The professor was, for once, not wearing her usual laboratory coat and was dressed in an old pair of jeans and a camouflage print military jacket. She looked so different that Odd had to pause for a moment to recognize her. As he and Richard approached at full speed, Robert Della Robbia's lantern turned towards them. "Son," the man cried. Odd didn't bother to reply. The robots were closing in on him. Robert and Professor Hertz reacted with precision and composure. The man raced up the stairs that led to the main building, kicking the door open all the way so that the young boys could take refuge inside. In the meantime, Hertz gathered up a large, dark sack and emptied the small red and blue plastic balls from it. "Watch out," she cried while throwing one of the blue objects at the robots chasing them. Odd ducked to avoid the projectile, which flew over his head and hit the helmet of one of the robots. Close by. The cylinder exploded with a small noise, and the air became suffocating. "Smoke bombs," coughed Richard. "Right," hollered Hertz. "And the red ones are full of acid, so be careful when you throw them." The two young boys reached the professor and began to help her with the attack, a red ball for every two blue ones. The robot army didn't take a long time to vanish, enveloped in thick smoke. At one point, Hertz called for them to retreat inside the building. Odd was the last to enter and turned the key, which was already in the keyhole. "How did you manage to prepare these bombs?" he asked, pressing his nose against the glass door. "Well, for the smoke bombs, it was easy enough. All I had to do was mix a bit of sugar, honey, and potassium nitrate. For the acid bombs, on the other hand, look," Richard interrupted them. The robots exited the smoke one by one. The compact line of robots had been scattered, and they were now in disarray. The armor of some of the robots had been stained by the acid, but they didn't seem to have sustained any serious damage. "We need to get out of here," said Robert, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Odd nodded his head. "We can head past the office and then take the side door out to the labs. I didn't see any robots on that end." "What about the dorms?" the professor asked apprehensively. "Yumi already went there, but she was followed." The boy paused for a moment to observe the robots that were accumulating in front of the entrance. The creatures remained immobile for a while, then the one at the front extended one of its arms, breaking through the glass as if it were nothing but tissue paper. The helmets of the rest of the robots glowed red, and all together, they began to bang wildly against the door, reducing it to pieces. They had no mouths, so they acted in total silence. All that could be heard was the relentless thuds of their fists against the metal and glass.
Well, it seems we're nearing the end of the book, because the next episode will be the finale of Book 3. So, we definitely got some personal time with XANA. In fact, I'm very surprised that my canonical universe almost has XANA right in the book, where he attains a human form, but yet he wants to be completely human. Perhaps this will be something I'll be writing a story about XANA's lament to humanity. So anyway, perhaps this is mirroring the near Season 4 finale, where XANA's robots were seeing the Siberia base ready to conquer the world. But instead of patrolling the base, taking out Ava and Aelita, the robots here are actually terrorizing Earth. And we can only hope that in these last chapters if they'll win or not. So if anyone noticed, I used the animatic upgrade to at least put the Chronicles logo at the title now. And it'll appear that way in future episodes. And yes, when I go back to making the first and second books in this format, I'll be using the respective Season 1 and 2 intros, as well as Season 4 with Book 4. So anyway, comment and subscribe and hit the like if you enjoyed it. I'm really enjoying it. And Merry Christmas to all, and I'll talk to you later. See ya.